Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Strick and Roll. I'm your host, Shwin, and this is episode 40. I am joined by not first time guest of the pod, but first time in a little while, not a long while, a little while. His name is Simon Cherin-Gordon. He runs and does social stuff for the NBA. That is at Simon Seago on Twitter. Simon, how are you doing today in this post-finals world?
I'm doing well. We talk all the time about like basketball ethos, and this finals was like for me, just like whoever won was going to be a win for my ethos. I'm sure we'll get into a lot of that as we go through our topic for today. But I would have been equally happy to see either of those teams win. I'm kind of glad whoever did it quickly, because for me that meant less time on the road. So happy to be here, and also just I think this is my first time on the solo pod. I could be wrong about that, but
I think you've been on it once before.
it's possible. It's possible. Been a while, if so.
Yeah, look, it's all blending together, and gotta say, I'm enjoying this little. It's not even like a lull because now there's all the slop of like the off season. So you got trade rumors and the draft and all that, all that stuff again is kicking in. But before we get started, and that's not even what we're talking about today, but we are going to talk about basketball. Before we get started, I do have to make a few announcements. The first being that the Strickland has an Instagram. Check that out. That is at thestrick.land on Instagram. We are posting all kinds of new content on there. The Strickland also has a YouTube channel where you may be watching this podcast. If you are and you haven't done so already, please hit like and then subscribe to the channel. That would be a huge help to us. The Strickland also has merchandise. Check it out. That is on our website. You can find it all on there. T-shirts, sweatshirts, hats, coffee mugs, even water bottles. There's a bunch of shit available, which you should buy if you feel so inclined. And then finally, the Strickland has a Patreon, which you can subscribe to. There are a number of different tiers. There is a $6 tier that gets you access to Pod Strickland, the podcast that I host every Friday with Prez. You also get access to the Strickland mailbag, hosted every other week by Andrew Steele, aka Doug, aka the Doug Bag, alongside Dallas Amico. You also get access to the Strickland Discord, where the conversation never stops. There are further tiers. There is a $9 tier that gets you access to Strick and Roll, my solo pod, where I rant and rave about the Knicks even more. You also get access to wonderful premium articles written by Matthew Miranda, one of the best in the business. There are further tiers. There's a $15 tier, a $30 tier, a $50 tier, and a $100 tier. Those come with a variety of additional benefits like listening on our pod recordings, merchandise discounts, and even potentially co-hosting a podcast alongside yours truly one day, whether you choose to subscribe. Not knows to be possible without you. And this would also not be possible without Bet Online, which is your number one source for all your championship finals info, stats, news, and scores. Get the latest odds and lines and the latest matchup reports for this year's NBA and Stanley Cup Finals. BetOnline is your sports intel headquarters this season, as we have you covered for all your insider sports wagering needs, from basketball and hockey to MLB, UFC, and boxing. The fastest and easiest way to get your betting info, including live betting options and your favorite casino and card games available to play right from your home. Get into the action today. Head to the website or use your mobile device to join, and be sure to use our promo code BLEAV, BLEAV, to receive your 50% bonus on your first deposit. Bet online, where the game starts. And the games are done, actually, this season, unfortunately, for us basketball fans. But now we are left to discuss the aftermath and what does this all mean. And, you know, I guess it's worth mentioning, not that like it really is relevant to what we're going to talk about, but Bradley Beal is apparently available for trade. So if that's a thing that you're interested in, that's very cool. I'm not.
I had a Wizards fan in my life say that he thinks they can get Simons in 3 for Beal in 8, which sounds fucking nuts to me if you're Portland, but that's neither here nor there for today.
Yeah. Um. Yeah. No. I look. Bradley Beal is just. Him and Dame but they're both hilarious.
Like, is he better than CJ? Like, how much better than CJ is he? I don't know. He's better, maybe.
He's better than CJ. I think like the thing with Beal is I always feel like if you did put him in a team where he's like the second or third best guy, actual and next to like an actual first best guy, that might be something. But like, this is thing where yeah, look, his salary is what it is, and for some teams, I think it's worth it. I don't personally think the Knicks are one.
No.
I don't think it makes sense for Golden State for what it's worth, even though
No.
I guess you have Steph, so maybe it is. I don't know. I
If
think
they want Poole, I'll take fucking KP. I'll take Kuzma. I'll take whoever. But
I actually like K. I think the Knicks should consider KP. I think he's an interesting, bring him back home now that he's figured it out. I don't know. I like the idea of like having a stretch five like him with the guys we have on the roster. Um, Although I think further alterations would need to be made after that point because a lot of his value is tied into what he actually does with the ball. Speaking of big men that have the ball a lot, look at that segue. Nikola Jokic delivering a masterclass of an NBA Finals, which prompted me to ask you. We gave it like a good solid 3 days. We're like, yeah, we should really let this simmer before we talk about this. But we wanted to talk about like all-time player rankings. I know that is not near and dear to everybody's heart, and it's not always near and dear to my heart. But in a year where Nikola Jokic successfully vanquished the dastardly Miami Heat, and I got to live to see another day where neither the Heat, the Celtics, the Lakers, the LeBrons, the all of my various
yeah,
enemies
who
around the
are we
NBA.
missing from that agenda?
There's a lot. There's a lot. Like,
Clippers.
the Clippers aren't really part of an agenda. I don't have a
Okay,
Clippers
that's fine.
agenda. Durant's part of the agenda, so I guess the Suns now are part of this agenda. Um, Chicago always, not that they were a threat. Pacers
Brooklyn, of
always.
course. You
Yeah,
forgot
Brooklyn. Well,
Brooklyn.
Brooklyn, once that it all happened in whatever it was, February, that was over. But yeah, all of my enemies have been seen off, and even the Cleveland Cavaliers who have suddenly become an enemy because we didn't trade for Donovan Mitchell. No, but it's a good as time as any after what was a truly historic playoff run by Jokic individually and a really fun team run by the Nuggets to kind of think about this stuff. And I'll turn it over to you because I think like these lists are always very complex and everybody has their own criteria, which is why like I try not to care too much about other people's lists unless there's just something that makes no sense. Like if it's like, oh, I have like Michael Jordan's like 12th on my list. Like I'm not sure that makes any sense. So I think your list sucks. But like most of the time, I think any list, even if I disagree with a certain player's ranking or whatever, I think there's usually reasoning behind it, but the reasoning isn't always the same for everybody. So I know this was an important part for you to explain. So I want you to explain how you and I did our list and why these things are so important to you.
Yeah, so my thing with all that is like people debate, and this doesn't just apply to like all-time rankings. This applies to basically every debate that we have about basketball. Like it could be current player rankings, it could be like what team is better or anything, but like who should be MVP, whatever it is. I think it's like really important that we agree on criteria before we have these debates because like just the MVP debate this year, right? It was like people weren't even arguing the same thing. Like to me, MVP is who provided like the most. I don't know what word to even use. I hate like terms like championship value, but the way I see it is just like the most valuable player is the one that makes their team like the best, and the most important thing is being a championship favorite, after that a championship contender. So like if you on the floor are making your team like that level of team, that is added value. If you off the floor is making your team worse, that is not added value. Like that has nothing to do with things you're actually doing. So like to me, the criteria should always just be about like what you actually accomplish when you're on the floor. And like a way to simplify that for me would be like if like let's say the Sixers went 50 and 0 with Joel Embiid on the floor and 0 and 22 or 0 and 32 with him injured. That to me would be the exact same thing as if they went 50 and 32 and he played every game because he provided like 50 wins of value. Um, and that's a different example, but that's kind of how I also think about like player rankings and these all-time rankings. I don't care how many championships you would have won had you had better teammates. I don't care, how many you would have won had your teammates been hurt. I don't care how tough your era was or how easy your era was, except maybe I kind of do, and we can get into that. But like, and I don't only care about championships for the record. My list isn't just like a rank, is not like Bill Russell number one and then like John Havlicek number two. Or I guess it would be like Sam Jones or something. But the point is like, obviously a lot more matters, but I do think it's important that we all agree on like the simple premise of the goal of basketball is to win championships, not to do anything else, not to win MVPs, not to put up stats, but to win championships. And the players who impact that the most over the course of their careers, and by impact it, I mean like do it or like come very close to doing it, are to me the greatest players of all time, and everything else is hypothetical. And I'll just close by saying like the reason it's important to agree on this before we have a conversation is like if we have a conversation with that discrepancy there, then we're not really getting anywhere. It's just like every player argument actually becomes like a criteria argument, and it's a lot more complicated and a lot less interesting, if you ask me.
Yeah. I will say, like, for me, it's a little bit different. I'm not actually sure how much different this is, but like, I think I can't get to a place where it's like, okay, well, you never won a championship, but your like it's your teammates and this thing and that. Like, I that to me is like, look, if you never did it, you never did it. It just is what it is. But like, there's a couple guys on my list. I know, like, I'll just say this: I have Hakeem Olajuwon probably higher than anybody else in the world has him on their list, because like at the end, like he actually had insane circumstances that propped up in the '80s with his team that were totally out of his control, and he stuck through it, and he ended up like he goes back to back. To me, it's like I can actually do some like I can give him some added bonus for the fact that he still won a couple of times back to back even. Because he finally did it, I can kind of go back and be like, look, like I get that he didn't win, he only won twice, but like his entire team got kicked out of the league because they were addicted to cocaine and Ralph Sampson's leg broke. Like that actually matters to me. Or a situation like Dirk, where it's like Dirk isn't as high, not even close to on my list to Hakeem, but like Dirk is higher on my list than I think comparable players, even guys maybe with more championships, because I think there's a value to like sticking to where you were, winning, getting it done where you were drafted, your team, however you want to phrase it, and overcoming adversity and overcoming stuff like Mark Cuban being a fucking idiot and letting Steve Nash leave in his prime because reasons. Like, I think those things, like once you get it done, then I can like go back and actually get like I can't do that with Harden. Like that's like I just can't do it with Harden. I can't do that with like Chris Paul. I can't do that with Karl Malone, or like if you never did it, you just never did it. I'm sorry. Like that's what it is. And like people do this all the time where it's like, oh well, fucking Michael Jordan played that, and what is he supposed to do? And I'm like, well, Michael Jordan left the NBA for like 2 years, and in those 2 years, Hakeem Olajuwon was just like, okay, well, I got it. Like, so you get credit for that. Like, it's like the LeBron thing, right? Where it's like, oh well, the Warriors signed KD, and I'm like, okay, well, like LeBron went to Miami and played with Wade and Bosh. Like, do we not count those championships? And I was like, I don't really get that. The only one who doesn't get championships counted is Kevin Durant.
And I'll just say, like, to your point, I agree with you. Like, I don't think we really disagree. My thing isn't like, again, I'm not just stacking up like rings and then just that's my list.
Bill Russell, number one.
Right. Yeah.
Robert Ory, number 2.
But it's more like you said, I need proof of something I'm going to believe about a player. I need proof that it's true. And like I'll even say with like Steph Curry, who I've always, you know, rode super hard for, as you know, like I still think he needed that fourth ring to solidify, like, not only it didn't only push him from 3 to 4, but it like really solidified the previous two, like where I was always like he was the best player on that team. That ring affected Steph's all-time rank and KD's all-time rank to me. So like I'm okay recontextualizing the past. And like Dirk, like you mentioned, great example. Hakeem, we'll get into all of it. I think we should get started, but like it's there's always nuance, and like that also makes it a more interesting conversation. But yeah, like I'm not gonna you're not gonna hear names like James Harden come up for either of us, I'm pretty sure.
James Harden will never be on my top 25 list, even if he three-peats from this point on. No, if he three-peats, I might consider it. But all right. Okay, yeah, we could start. I guess we'll do this in reverse order. So 25. Or do you want to do 20, 25? I don't care. I had up 25 because I had like, I know we said 20, but then I had like names left over, and I'm like, I guess I'll just rank the last 5, and it is what it
So
is.
let's do 25, but like for me, I have a list of 20. I know you have 25, and then I have a bunch of guys I want to like pick your brain on that I'm like trying to figure out where they go.
Yeah, that
Um,
works.
so like I can just start because these are honorable mentions. I don't think these guys would even make my top 25, and I'm curious if any of them are in yours. But like we're talking about championships, and for the most part, like you have to have been the best player on a title team. My top 20 has one exception to that, but uh, and then my guys like 21, 22, 23, 24 are all kind of within that too. But guys, there's like then this whole group of dudes who don't. There's kind of after that is when people start being like, okay, now I'm gonna put like the almost, the guys who never won or whatever, and I'm like, what do we do with Rick Barry, Bill Walton, Dave Cowens, like Willis Reed, Walt Frazier, Elvin Hayes, Gus Williams, like all of these dudes from the 70s that won one or two in the case of those Knicks players, like, or I think Cowens won two also, right? Like, why? And Walton technically won two, but
Yeah,
why?
yeah. Well, yeah, that's just
But
not.
like, why do those guys kind of get like not the same treatment as the modern players? Like I get not going back to the 50s when like there were like 8 teams and they were all white players or whatever. Like we're not going to put fucking Bob Pettit on here. But why don't those players from the 70s get
So,
the same like treatment that we give like a Dirk or a Garnett or a Giannis or Jokic?
like if you only have one, or you're just saying like the whole kind of.
Yeah, like only have one, but like,
Well,
and
I
I
mean,
know
I
that
think.
some of them aren't, like Gus Williams isn't as great a player as like Bill Walton, but like, yeah, I'm curious kind of where you come down on all that.
So I mean, like the weird thing is, you got to remember, like the '70s are just kind of this weird time, especially the back half of it, because it's like you've had the ABA, right? So the league isn't. There's talent, but there's talent in the ABA too. Like what? I don't even think they emerged in what 70, 78, 78, something like that.
76, 77, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. So like you have all these years where like Irving has a bunch of years in the ABA. Rick Barry has years in the ABA. It's just a weird time in the league. And like this is why I moved Kareem all the way up, and I still don't really feel great about having him at 4. But like, to some extent it's like, okay, well, like the accomplishments are the accomplishments. Like at some point you just have to like honor what that is. Um, Even if I don't totally believe he's like as high as I should have him, like I guess you just kind of have to defer to that to an extent. Um, but like I think that when you're talking about those guys, like I mean, it's just a totally different league, and then on top of it, like I don't know, like I don't like to do it. Dave Cowens played on like stacked fucking Celtics teams. You know what I mean? Like absolutely stacked Celtics teams. Was he really the best player on those teams ever? Like, I mean, how many times was he the best player on those teams? Maybe a better question or a better way to frame it. You know, I mean, he won the MVP in '73, but like I look, I'm not saying I've read all the fucking articles from back then, firsthand notes and stuff like that, but even guys that played in the era, I don't hear them fucking talk about Dave Cowens. Like, I've watched the Knicks my entire life. Walt Clyde Frazier has been doing Knicks games my entire life. He never talks about Dave Cowens. He talks about fucking, he'll talk about Wilt, he'll talk about Russell, he'll talk about Kuzi, Havlet. Like, he'll talk about, Jerry West, Elgin Baylor. Like, he talks about guys all the time from his era. I've never heard him once. And he hates the Celtics. So, like, every time they play the Celtics, he's like, fucking Bill Russell, this fucking guy. Like, I hate him. He ruined my life. Like, he never talks about Dave Cowens. I think that has to count for something. If nobody from your era is talking about you and you're not really discussed highly among your contemporaries, I think that has to count, especially when we go back to eras where, like, let's be honest, man, like, we do a list as best as we can with all the research we can, but it's not like we went back and we're like, oh man, let's check out the 75 finals. Like, really want to see what Dave Cowens got up to in this one, or like, you're just not going to do that. So you have to depend on, yes, stats, but you have to depend on kind of like anecdotal evidence and, say what you want, right? If you never looked at like Basketball Reference and you just have to go by articles and quotes and stuff like that about who were the best players of the 2010s or 2020s, like, you would come up with the list of players that, looking at the numbers, are going to tell you anyway. You know what I mean? Like that stuff has to matter. So I think I mean, there's always exceptions, right? Like a guy like Rick Barry doesn't get talked a lot about by his contemporaries because he's like a huge raging fucking asshole prick. Like, nobody likes him. Like, great player, all-time great Warrior. I'm pretty sure you won't hear many Warriors fans talking about like how much they love Rick Barry, even though he was an amazing player. And like, I think Oscar Robertson in some ways, and for him it's probably a little bit more unfair because he was advocating. I think Kareem gets punished, or at the time, but the way he was covered in some ways, these are guys that are advocating for like, you know, equal rights, civil rights, all that kind of stuff that was unpopular. So they got covered in certain ways. And, back then, like, look, it's not like racism doesn't exist now, but it was probably, I mean, not probably, was worse back then. And I think that, like, there are certain guys that get punished for that, and that is what it is. But Rick Barry, by the way, just want to, if anybody doesn't know, really white, not why he's getting punished, just actually a prick. Also, I think doesn't have a relationship with both of his sons, maybe both playing in the NBA. It's some crazy thing. He's just an asshole. Great free throw shooter though. But yeah, that's what I think. I think it's like, at the end of the day, it's all subjective. So everybody's gonna have their own biases, and you just kind of have to make do as best as you can.
Yeah, no, I think that's all fair. And like, I think to your point about like the merger, I think it's really fair to like discount pre-merger. Obviously, like when I'm looking at ABA guys that came over, like Irving, Barry, players like that, I'm only looking at their NBA, their like post-merger stats anyway. But you also then have to look at like the pre-merger NBA players not facing as much competition because of that. And like, so when I looked at like Russell and like the 60s, I'll get into my methodology later for exactly how I did this, but I looked at those championships as worth less because of how many teams there were. But even as you get into the 70s and even the 80s, like the NBA has kind of continuously expanded. So I do think it's fair to like weigh like a Dirk championship in a 30-team league over like a fucking, whatever, Bill Walton, let's say, in like a 14-team league or 16, whatever it was in 1977. Do you want to go through? Why don't you go through your like 25 through 21, and I can kind of give my thoughts on where I had those guys too.
Yeah. So 25, I had Charles Barkley. 24, I had Isaiah Thomas. 23, I had John Havlicek. 22, I had Julius Irving. 21, I had Kevin Durant. I'm not gonna lie, I kind of wanted to move Durant down, but I was like, am I just being a really huge hater now? I don't know. Like, I really don't know about that one because to me, I know this is like very nitpicky, and it's like, well, how can you say Steph has 4 and Durant has none? But it's like, to me, there's just something that will always be thoroughly. It's like, I count like, okay, he has 1 ring. How about that? Because can that be the compromise? Like, you get 1 ring for hopping on with like Steph, and it's just like there's no. I mean, I've talked about this with you before, but it's like I just don't know how to value something where like he had this entire thing in OKC that would have. And I think Jokic had a really interesting quote today that came out because it's like the first thing he said after they won the championship, where it sounds like it meant something to him. But he said like, you have to fail, then you have to get good, and then you have to fail when you get good to learn from it, and then you have to like succeed, and that's like your journey. Like you have to go on a journey, and I feel like Durant, like he did the got good and failed thing, and then was like, oh man, this sucks. I need to just get myself a ring right now. Let me go to the Warriors, and I understand. Like I know it's look, his other options are like what Boston. He wasn't going to go to fucking Boston. He could have stayed at OKC. He didn't want to play with Russ. I understand that stuff, but just like I'm not going to do the circumstances thing for James Harden, I'm not going to do the thing where it's like, well, what else was you supposed to? I don't fucking care. Just don't go. Like, understand how weak that looks. Understand how un like I don't know how to like. You're a Warriors fan, so you can speak to this. You can tell me if I'm right or wrong. But like, there's no way I will ever believe that those 2 rings they won with KD are close to as like emotionally validating and worthwhile as the 2015 title or the 2022 title. Like, I just
Yeah.
will never believe that.
No, they're not. And like I think that's the thing is like Kevin Durant is a champion. There's no like I'm not going to take that away from him. We're not talking about if he's a champion. And he deserves credit also for having the type of game that was able to take that team from like a really really good team to like arguably the greatest team of all time. Like he deserves credit for having that type of game. But being a champion, like so does Draymond Green, so does Klay Thompson. Like being a champion is not the point here. It's about like being the foundation of a championship team. And KD just wasn't that. Like I'm not gonna look at KD. I had Durant right on the cusp, and I ended up at the last minute leaving him off my top 20. He's 21 on my list. Um, and I know this isn't going like perfectly in order, but I had Charles Barkley at 19. And like I know you have Barkley at 25, so like slight discrepancy there. But to me, like Barkley as a number 1 guy did more in like the 93 finals. And this isn't like the excuse making like, oh, it's only because of Jordan. Like I'm not giving him a ring, but to me Barkley is the player who came who I give like the most credit to for a single season where he didn't win a ring out of any player. So like I've ended up valuing that a little bit more than Durant's 2 rings with the Warriors. And it's splitting hairs. It's 19 versus 21. But like the other thing that came up with Durant for me is like it's not just that he hasn't done it, it's that if you go back 2 years to that series versus Milwaukee, I was like, fuck, okay, KD is like moving up my list right now because this is pretty fucking amazing what he's doing, like despite all the shit happening around him and like Kyrie and Harden both getting hurt and all that. And like he almost single-handedly beat the eventual champs that year. The problem is like he didn't fucking stick with it. He like demanded a trade. Well, first of all, the next year they got swept, and then demanded a trade that summer and kind of torpedoed their season. And like then they were starting to turn it around and whatever, and then he like ended up getting traded. Um, but it's like he had kind of redeemed himself a little bit, and then again he like bailed on the situation. So I'm totally with you. He's one of
Yeah,
those. If we were just doing like basketball talent, he'd be like top 10 for sure. But that's just not what this is about.